The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Inarguably the biggest evidence of obstruction of justice by President Donald Trump since the firing of former FBI Director James Comey. The New York Times is reporting the bombshell allegation that Donald Trump ordered Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor, be fired. We've been talking for the last couple of months about what has held Trump back from ordering Mueller fired. Does Trump realize that it would be a disastrous thing in terms of the optics, or does Trump realize that it actually might be obstruction of justice to go and fire Robert Mueller? What is it that has kept Trump from firing Mueller? And it turns out the answer is nothing has kept Trump from ordering the firing of Robert Mueller. But when he did order the firing in last June, the White House counsel threatened to resign rather than actually go through and fire Robert Mueller. And then that made Donald Trump sort of back off. I'm talking about Trump's White House lawyer, Don McGahn, who straight up refused to tell the Justice Department to go ahead and fire Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller when Trump told him to do it and said, "I will quit if you force me to tell the Justice Department to fire Robert Mueller." An innocent person cooperates with the investigation. They don't order every higher up involved that they can imagine fired or tell someone else to go and fire them. And of course, some Trumpists are calling the story itself fake news. In fact, Fox News' Sean Hannity was, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the program. But as is often the case with Donald Trump, and most of the times that he has said the New York Times reporting has been fake news, it's actually really well-sourced and super specific reporting from the New York Times. Trump said, quote, "Fake news, folks, fake news. A typical New York Times fake story." Well, that so-called fake story from the New York Times included the details that when Donald Trump found out that Robert Mueller was looking at obstruction of justice charges, Trump said that there were conflicts about Robert Mueller that should get him fired. And Trump apparently was reminded of or remembered that there was once a dispute where Robert Mueller was a member at one of Donald Trump's golf clubs and ended up canceling his membership because he wasn't happy about some kind of fee. And that apparently, in Donald Trump's mind, constituted such a conflict of interest that Robert Mueller should be released from his role as special prosecutor. Trump also said Mueller couldn't possibly be impartial because he had most recently worked for a law firm that represented Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, which in my mind, if anything, that's a conflict that works in Trump's favor in some way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Mueller's a top-tier lawyer, and these are top-tier clients that we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's going to be some conflict no matter where you go, right?
You would think so, operating at that level. And that's not everything. Trump not only ordered Mueller fired, but he also ordered his own staff to start smearing the people at the FBI that would be able to confirm early on that Trump was trying to end the Russia investigation. Foreign Policy is reporting yet another well-sourced and well-done report that Trump, once this investigation got going, ordered his top political and legal staff to start smear campaigns against people at the FBI that would likely be part of Robert Mueller's investigation against him and that would know that Trump was actively trying to end that investigation. This includes the current Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who he also was recently pressuring Jeff Sessions to have fired. It includes James Comey's Chief of Staff Jim Rubicki. It includes former FBI General Counsel James Baker. The Washington Post, in addition to the Foreign Policy report and in addition to the New York Times report, the Washington Post has since also independently confirmed the story by the Times, which again, Donald Trump wrote off as fake news. And I want to bring your attention to something that now two major newspapers are reporting. 6 months ago, or several months ago, Kellyanne Conway and John Dowd and Trump himself all lied in interviews about firing Robert Mueller. On August 6th to George Stephanopoulos, Kelly Conway said, quote, he has not even discussed that, meaning the firing of Mueller. The president has not discussed firing Bob Mueller. That was in August. Turns out that was a lie because Trump ordered Mueller fired in June. In USA Today on August 8th, John Dowd said, quote, that's never been on the table. Never. It's a manifestation of the media. We now know that 2 months prior, Donald Trump ordered the firing of Robert Mueller. And Trump himself on August 10th was asked by a gaggle about the firing of Robert Mueller. And he said, quote, I haven't given it any thought. You could say maybe Kellyanne Conway didn't know that Trump had done this. You could say maybe John Dowd didn't know that Trump had done this. But Donald Trump himself surely knew on August 10th that in June he himself had ordered Robert Mueller fired, right? This is the clearest case for obstruction of justice so far. And Trump has lied about it, further incriminating himself here.
Yeah, we really are seeing this like new crop emerging of secondary crimes that Trump and others are committing.
Yep.
You look at obstruction of justice, whether it be him firing Comey or trying to pressure Jeff Sessions to resign, now ordering the firing of Robert Mueller. And then you can add to that, you know, if he was to have an interview with Mueller, could he lie in that interview? Could he perjure himself, lie to the FBI? And you know, the only reason you do all that stuff is because you're hiding something.
Yeah, again, if Trump, instead of the tweets and all of this sidebar stuff, had only ever said about Russia, we're cooperating with the investigation and will continue advancing our legislative agenda until such time that the investigation finalizes. A lot of this stuff never would have happened. And even Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says that, yeah, this is something we have to look into. This attempt to fire Robert Mueller is something that should become part of Robert Mueller's investigation. Here he is yesterday on ABC's This Week.
I don't know. I believe it's something that Mueller should look at. We're not going to just say it's fake news and move on. Mueller's the best person to look at it, not me opine about something I don't know. I'm sure that there'll be an investigation around whether or not President Trump did try to fire Mr. Mueller. We know that he didn't fire Mr. Mueller. We know that if he tried to, it'd be the end of his presidency. So at the end of the day, let Mr. Mueller do his job.
The ways in which this entire investigation is mirroring the investigation that ultimately took down President Richard Nixon is truly stunning. The first count in Richard Nixon's articles of impeachment was obstruction of justice. And what set that off was when Richard Nixon ordered the firing of the independent special prosecutor Archibald Cox. That led to the resignations of the then Attorney General and the then Deputy Attorney General during Watergate. And you know the rest. And it's getting sort of cliche to even say it, but it's often not the crime, it's the cover-up. It may actually be both here, but this is not looking good whatsoever. I have for you today, following up on this bombshell revelation that Donald Trump ordered the firing of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, I have something very special for you. Let me put it that way. And Pat is already grinning because I know that he really likes this as well.
Waiting all weekend.
This is video from Sean Hannity's broadcast from a couple of days ago on Fox News, when news was breaking of Donald Trump's failed order to have Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller fired. And I want to be careful not to be hyperbolic, not to exaggerate what you are about to see. But in the interests of remaining non-hyperbolic, I'm comfortable telling you that this is not only the most objectively embarrassing set of clips from a Sean Hannity broadcast, but also one of the most brutal implosions of right-wing denialism and talking points right before our very eyes that I have ever seen. As news was breaking, as reported by the New York Times and eventually as confirmed by the Washington Post, that back in June, President Donald Trump ordered the firing of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, bolstering the case even further, right, for obstruction of justice. Sean Hannity took to the airwaves and said in no uncertain terms, this is not a real story. The New York Times has lied before, and it is merely an attempt to distract you with this story. Here is Sean Hannity at the beginning of his program.
Now, tonight, for example, they're trying to change the story. At this hour, the New York Times is trying to distract you. They have a story that Trump wanted Mueller fired sometime last June, and our sources, and I've checked in with many of them, they're not confirming that tonight. And the president's attorney dismissed the story and says, no comment, we're not going there. And how many times has the New York Times and others gotten it wrong?
just a distracting fake story. Minutes later, on Sean Hannity's same broadcast, on the same day, on the same show, take a look.
All right, so we have sources tonight just confirming to Ed Henry that, yeah, maybe Donald Trump wanted to fire the special counsel for conflict. Does he not have the right to raise those questions? You know, we'll deal with this tomorrow night. We have a shocking video of the day to bring you, by the way. This footage comes to us from Arizona where you see that red SUV, high-speed police chase. Ultimately, the suspects...
We'll talk about the bombshell story I just told you was fake 10 minutes ago tomorrow. Quick, cut to footage of a car chase and two cars violently crashing at an intersection. And by the way, Hannity misrepresenting the story, saying that, okay, maybe Trump thought about firing Mueller. No, the report is Trump ordered Mueller to be fired. That's not thought. The reason Hannity says he thought about it is because then they can say, listen, we don't punish thought crime in the United States. There is a difference legally between thinking, wonder if I should fire Mueller, in his internal dialogue while sitting on his phone or playing golf or whatever it is, and ordering the White House counsel to execute the firing. Those are two very different things.
Yeah, this is the classic example of right-wingers moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
You deny that the account happened, and then once the account becomes undeniable, you just say that it wasn't a big deal. This is exactly what he did here.
Do you think Hannity decided to do this out of his own sense of responsibility to the truth? I sort of have a hard time believing that. I think it's more likely that some executive must have called over and said, the story is real, and you've got to say something about that.
Yeah, I didn't check out the Friday edition of the Hannity show.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he did a hard-hitting deep dive into this whole scandal here.
Yeah, and by the whole scandal, you mean that car crash that he showed at,
yeah,
at the end of the show. Interestingly, at the same time that we now know Trump was ordering the firing of Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, Hannity himself was advocating for the firing of Robert Mueller on his Fox News program, and this went in minutes, right? From the New York Times lies all the time and they're trying to distract you, to who cares if Trump tried to fire Mueller? Take a look at this car chase instead. And last thing on this, for everyone saying it doesn't matter if Trump ordered Mueller fired because he was not ultimately fired. That's not true. I saw an analogy on Reddit that I found relevant here. Don't quote that. That's quite a phrase by itself, but in any case, if you try to rob a bank but the teller refuses to give you the money, you're still going to jail. If on that To Catch a Predator show on TV where they set up stings for would-be child sex offenders, if you show up at the house under the belief that there was a 12-year-old kid waiting for you to have sex with, you're going to jail whether or not there really ever was a kid. And likewise, there's a difference between Trump thinking of maybe I'd try to fire Mueller and ordering the firing of Robert Mueller, and those two are not equivalent, and maybe we will eventually see a court of law actually figure out that difference.
Yeah, another analogy would be that if you take a meeting at Trump Tower under the auspices of getting dirt on Hillary Clinton,
yes,
and then you don't end up getting that dirt, you still, intended to collude with the Russians,
That's
right?
exactly right. That is exactly right, and yet another analogy. So not a good 72 hours for Donald Trump, seemingly a very illuminating 72 hours for the Robert Mueller investigation into Donald Trump's campaign. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Explosive Monday program for you today. Glad you're with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new David Pakman Show member of the day is Samuel Johnson. Samuel, thank you so much. We're mostly funded by memberships like that of new member Samuel Johnson. And as I've promised, we are now also going to recognize, because it's not just our new members that matter, our longtime sustaining members also are really, really important. Today's sustaining member of the day is Robert S. Young Jr. I just know him as Bob Young. I just know him as Bob Young from our affiliate KNYO out in Fort Bragg, California. Bob has been not only a supporter of the show by broadcasting the David Pakman Show on his station KNYO since 2010, he has been a sustaining member since May 18th of 2010, 7.5 years. Pat seems to love the sustaining member stuff. He always gets this goofy grin on his face whenever I talk about it.
Yeah, I imagine some of these sustaining members threaten to pull their membership and then sign back up just so they could be mentioned on the show?
No,
That's
of
why we
course
had
not.
to start this,
That
right?
would reset their membership date. And no,
Yeah.
these have been uninterrupted sustaining members for this
What I'm
duration
saying
of
is
time.
they would cancel it and then sign up again just so they could become new members of the day and
Oh,
have
I
their
see.
names mentioned on the show.
Right. Yes, yes, yes. I don't know what Pat's talking about, but I'm sure he's making a really, really good point. And we're going to really dig into the details of that during the next commercial break. Okay. Anyway, sign up for whatever reason, for the thing Pat said or for any reason. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. And okay, we'll get it together here. And Patreon. Patreon's also great. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Speaking of Patreon, okay, we have a fantastic countdown. Is it fair to say it's accelerating? I think it is accelerating.
Is it?
I think, well, I don't know. We'll run the math on it in a moment. The background is what? April, I mean, it depends how far back we want to go. In 1984, I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yeah. I eventually moved to the U.S. and started the David Pakman Show. And when we got to April of 2017 in that story, we launched a Patreon fundraising page at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. We have a target of 2,100 donors, which when reached will trigger, I guess, got to be careful using that word these days, it will release the critical thinking miniseries that we have been working on. And that 2,100 patron goal is something that we have been inching closer and closer to now for several weeks. Last week, I told you we needed 100 more patrons. Then late last week, we were down to needing only 85. We are now down, as of this morning, we had 2,043 patrons.
Yep.
We are 57 patrons away from the 2,100 milestone. And we are moving ahead on this critical thinking miniseries. The introduction to the critical thinking miniseries is done. It looks really cool. It is fully animated by producer Noah Ferguson. We'll be talking about arguments. We'll be talking about logical fallacies. We'll be talking about, I don't know, epistemology and media literacy. Yep. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. But we've got to get to 2,100 patrons to do it. I am worried. I'm going to be very upfront. I'm worried about the upcoming February 1st date.
I know.
Because on the first day of the month, when Patreon goes to run everyone's pledges, usually between 3 and 5% of the patrons have credit cards that have expired or get declined, and we are knocked away from the number of patrons. So I think it would be best if in the next 72 hours before February 1st, we can do this, which really, it only requires about 18 new patrons per day. Like, it's totally doable if we decide, hey, let's do this thing. And whether it's a $1 contribution or $10 or $100, we're just trying to get to 2,100 patrons.
Yeah, that's why we're coming to you now with this rallying cry, because
yes, a rallying cry.
In a week, if we don't get it done, it's just going to be a regular cry.
It's going to be a regular cry, and then we'll be trying to get it done during February, yes, but from a much lower number than 2,043 patrons we now have. So let's make it happen, patreon.com/David Pakman Show. The guy who is supposedly for free speech and against safe spaces, against political correctness, against language policing, is refusing to visit the United Kingdom unless Prime Minister Theresa May can ensure Donald Trump that there will be no protests of his visit, or he is simply not going to go. Bloomberg is also reporting that when they spoke on the phone, Donald Trump complained to the Prime Minister of the UK, Theresa May, that there is negative coverage of him in the press. And Theresa May rightly said, yeah, that's how the UK media operates, and I'm not able to change that myself. And reportedly, the advisors who were listening on that phone call were, quote, astonished at what Donald Trump was saying to her. Can you even imagine this absurdity? Of course she would never do it, but just imagine for a second that Theresa May announced, during Donald Trump's visit, protests will not be allowed, period. It would lead to the biggest protests in a very long time in the UK. Free speech is great for the US, I guess, according to Trump, but the UK needs to curtail it for Donald Trump's thin skin. And this is the sort of total lack of tact and common sense that Trump has. Even if you're Trump and you're thinking, really don't want protests, you don't say it because you sort of understand that peaceful protesting is a cherished aspect of Western democracies. But Trump just straight up says it because he has absolutely no understanding of the context into which he's making such a request. Have you ever seen a president this thin-skinned? And it's particularly funny because the committed Trumpists see Trump as a guy who's tough and he's not afraid to tell it like it is. And Trump himself has tried really hard to cultivate this view of him. Check out this interview. This was from right in the heat of the campaign with Jake Tapper, where he talked about how thick-skinned he actually is.
One of the things she said was, this is not someone who should have the nuclear codes. It's not hard to imagine Donald Trump leading us into war because someone got under his very thin skin. What's your response to that?
Well, first of all, I don't have thin skin. I have very strong, very thick skin. And when somebody's right about me, I always, if you do a report and it's not necessarily positive, but you're right, I never complain. I do complain when it's a lie or when it's wrong. But I have a strong temperament, and it's a very good temperament, and it's a very in-control temperament, or I wouldn't have built this unbelievable company. I wouldn't have built all of the things that I've been able to do in life. I've been #1 bestsellers.
He has the strongest, thickest skin.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to go. I was thinking about Obama, and when Obama would go overseas, he was greeted pretty favorably, right? You could disagree with Obama's policies, but objectively, he did resuscitate the reputation of the U.S. around the world. He would go to Germany. Sure. He would go to so many places people would come out and cheer Obama. And maybe Trump is aware of that. He's aware of a lot of the things Obama did. It seemed to be something of an obsession for him. And maybe that's part of this. He wants to be treated like Obama.
Well, it's weird to me because Trump has done plenty of state visits. He went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Israel, and Germany and France, and he visited Duterte, his buddy, out in the Philippines.
And he was protested in a lot of those places.
Yeah, but I mean, does the UK really stand out too distinctly from the rest of those countries? I know they had a petition in that country of 1.8 million people signing on
to ban Trump.
From coming.
I don't know.
I
don't know why it's so particular. It's particularly an obsession when it comes to the UK. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe part of it is Obama was the first U.S. president ever invited to make an address at Westminster Hall in the UK. And now you've got, like Pat said, nearly 2 million people who are trying to keep Trump out of the country, never mind at Westminster Hall. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but Trump clearly very, very triggered by the possibility of these protests. Special snowflake Trump, highly triggered.
It would be highly ironic, I would say, if the welcoming of the U.S. president was met with something that was completely un-American, which is a policy that you can't speak openly, you can't protest, right?
Which actually was sort of the situation when he went to Saudi Arabia. Like that's the place that, if you're looking for places where people will be banned from protesting you, it's usually not the countries that we try to aspire to be like in the United States. There has only been news coverage of a couple of mass shootings in 2018, including one in Kentucky, after which the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sent a message of support to the victims, but President Trump was weirdly silent about it. But even though we're not even 1 month into 2018, the numbers are already horrifying. I started thinking about this again after that call we got last week. Last week during live calls, if you missed it, a pro-gun liberal called in and we talked a little bit. And it made me invigorated for exploring what the gun death statistics were for 2018 so far, and it's really, really bad. We've got for you from gunviolencearchive.org, as of today, January 29th, 2018, there have been over 4,100 shootings in the United States so far in 2018. Remember, we're not even a month in. There have been over 1,100 deaths from shootings in the U.S. and over 2,000 injuries. Almost 50 kids age 11 or under have been killed by guns in just January. 215 teens aged 12 to 17 killed in the United States by guns just so far. 21 mass shootings and just 121 defensive uses of guns. And a defensive use does not even necessarily mean that the gun was actually fired, nor that it was actually necessary to use a gun. And of course, unintentional shootings, I call them negligent discharges, 145 there. Just in the last 24 hours, we've had shootings everywhere from here in the Boston area to Tucson, Arizona, to Charlotte, North Carolina, to Houston, Texas, as well as in small towns like Diverville, Mississippi, and McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. There were 4 mass shootings just over the weekend. There was one in Bowling Green, Kentucky. No, that's not the Bowling Green massacre that Kellyanne Conway was talking about once. This is an actual mass shooting that took place in Bowling Green, Kentucky. mass shooting in Los Angeles, California. We had a mass shooting over the weekend in Melcroft, Pennsylvania, and also one in Indianapolis, Indiana. And to really deal with this issue, there needs to be an all-encompassing, multifaceted solution. And there's a couple different problems here, right? Number one is an issue of tactics. The pro-gun right is correct that if you just limit the types of guns or ammo alone, you're not going to fix the broader gun violence problem in the United States. If you are on the pro-gun right, you're wrong if you say we should only be looking at mental health. It's not just a mental health issue. The left, likewise, is wrong if they believe that background checks and banning assault weapons is the panacea to solve this problem. This is about availability of guns, lack of background checks and required training. It is about mental health, but most importantly and sort of more broadly, this is about the toxic relationship that exists in the United States between too many Americans and their guns, where people see firearms as tools to solve problems. This means tools to solve interpersonal problems, tools to solve political disagreements and disputes. That's the part that really has to be changed. And I don't actually know how you change that. But in the meantime, there are other things we can do. Last thing I want to say about this. There's a growing movement on the internet, mostly, that likes to say that they are about principles and ideas. And they say, we don't want to get mixed up so much in the day-to-day politics and policy because the principles are what matter. If you can't identify your principles, then you're going to be completely clueless about what are the actual policies you should support or oppose. The problem with that, and I've been working on this a little bit, I've been talking to one of our longtime viewers and friends, Greg Stevens, about this and some other people. The problem is that unless you realize that no set of principles will be all-encompassing, you will falsely be lulled into this idea that if you can just come up with some hard and fast principles, you never will actually have to do the work of thinking through complicated situations. And that relates to guns how? It relates to guns because if you take the position that we have a Second Amendment and we do not need, nor does the Constitution allow for, common sense gun safety regulation, you don't actually have to do the tough work of figuring out what is specifically going on in the U.S. when it comes to guns. How would a combination of mental health and restrictions on firearms and training and background checks, how would all of those things together impact the problem that we have? You can just do the easy thing, which is cite a principle based on a multi-hundred-year-old document and your particular interpretation of that Second Amendment and say, listen, I'm a constitutionalist, and this is what the Constitution says. That's really what matters. And that is a dangerous movement that we can apply to a lot of places. This is not me going on some kind of like postmodern rant where nothing has meaning and everything is equally valid and there's no objective reality. That's not what I'm saying. What I am telling you is that any movement that's looking for sort of universal principles that will apply in every situation and sort of excuse you from having to actually look at the numbers I presented to you here about gun violence and say, we've actually got to go beyond just our principles and ideals and figure out solutions. It is actually a cop-out. And I would encourage a lot of the people that are being bamboozled by this internet movement of, let's just list our principles and debate ideas. You're falling for something that will not actually get us to real-world solutions, and that's a real problem. Discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/REDBIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Johann Hari, who is the author of the book Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. Johann, it's great to have you back on. Last time we were talking about the war on drugs, and there's sort of a connection between the treatment of depression and drugs. And this is a particularly interesting topic to me. I have a lot of people in my family who have worked in the mental health field for a very, very long time, many of them with very diverse views on issues such as the treatment of depression. So let's just to set the sort of stage for the conversation, How did this become something you started researching?
It was very personal for me. There were these two mysteries that were really hanging over me. And to be honest, I was really frightened to look into them. It's a sign of how frightened I was to investigate this, that I wanted to start doing this 7 years ago. And I decided it would be easier to go and spend time with hitmen for the Mexican drug cartels for my other book instead. The first mystery was, why was I still depressed? I'd gone to my doctor when I was a teenager, and I'd explained to him, I had this feeling like pain was leaking out of me like a kind of bad smell. I couldn't regulate it. I couldn't understand why it was happening. And it was very frightening. And my doctor told me a story. He said, we know why you feel this way. There's a chemical called serotonin in people's brains. You're clearly lacking it. I'm going to give you these drugs to boost your levels of serotonin. You're going to feel fine. And I felt a tremendous boost. Even before I took the drugs, I felt a tremendous boost to be given a story about why I felt this way. And I started taking them, and I felt a really significant boost for a few months. And then that sense of pain started to bleed back through. So I went back, he gave me a higher dose. I felt a bit better again, then a little bit faster this time, the pain came back, and I was in that kind of cycle until for 13 years I was drugging myself in this way. And at the end of it, I thought, why do I still feel this way? I'm doing everything I'm told to do. The second mystery, which is the much more important one, is I wanted to understand why so many people in our culture were starting to feel really depressed and anxious. 1 in 5 Americans takes a psychiatric drug. 1 in 11 people takes an antidepressant. I was like, what's going on here? And instinctively, I thought, it can't be just that there's something chemically going wrong in everyone's brain spontaneously, and that seems to be happening more. There must be more to this story than that. I think when you have a story about your pain and your distress, even if it doesn't work very well, it's like putting a kind of leash on that pain. It's like putting a leash on a wild animal. At least you know where it is. And so I went on this big, long journey. I went over 40,000 miles. I met with the best scientists in the world who've studied what causes depression and anxiety and how to solve them. And I went to places that just have very different perspectives, from an Amish community in Indiana, because the Amish have very low levels of depression, to a city in Brazil where they banned advertising to see if it would make people feel better, to a lab at one of the best universities in the United States where they were giving people psilocybin, the active component in magic mushrooms, to see if that made them feel better. And I learned many things. The first thing I learned is that the story I was told by my doctor is not true. Professor Andrew Scull at Princeton University says it is deeply misleading and unscientific to say that depression is just caused by low serotonin. Dr. David Healy, one of the experts in Britain, said to me, you can't even say that story has been discredited because it was never actually credited. There was never a time when half of the scientists in the field believed it. It was essentially promoted by the drug company PRs. But the fact that it's not caused by serotonin doesn't mean there's no value in chemical antidepressants. There's some value. And for most people, it's relatively small. I thought I was a freak all that time. Actually, I was completely normal. Depression is measured by something called the Hamilton scale. I've always felt sorry for whoever Hamilton was. He's remembered for just how miserable people feel. But if you're at 1 on the Hamilton scale, you would be dancing around in ecstasy. And if you're at 51, you would be acutely suicidal. And to give you a sense of what movement on the Hamilton scale looks like, improving your sleep patterns will give you a 6-point improvement on the Hamilton scale.
So let's pause there if we can, Johann, just because there's already a lot there that I want to talk about, just to see where we agree and where we sort of disagree. So I agree that the sort of simplifying of the depression as a chemical imbalance to not enough serotonin has you're right, and to say it's even been debunked might not be true, because it was never even really a confirmed or postulated theory to begin with. But I do think that the term chemical imbalance is a little more complex, in the sense that chemical imbalance can mean not that the level of serotonin isn't right, but that it's a brain that's failing to correctly or well enough regulate emotion, for example. It's not so much an imbalance in a particular chemical, but it's still brain related. Do we sort of agree on at least that part?
Sure. I have a whole chapter in Lost Connections about the changes that do happen in the brain when someone becomes depressed, that do make it harder to get out of depression. Those brain changes are not the cause, but they make it harder for you to get out. And I go through particularly the work of Professor Mark Lewis, who's really explained, I think, most clearly and brilliantly the nature of those changes. Now, he says those changes should not be described as a chemical imbalance. I mean, I think the point you're making is essentially right. You can get into a kind of semantic disagreement about the words you use to describe it. But no, you're right. There are real biological factors that contribute to depression and anxiety, and there are people who deny that, and they're completely wrong.
So if we grant, then, I guess, to take it a step further, if we grant that there certainly are some biological factors, maybe what the model that we build is one where those biological factors might serve as a sort of predisposition where in stressful situations or in particular circumstances or when experiencing certain emotions, one is predisposed to suffer from depression and or anxiety based on their biological makeup. Is that, do we still sort of continue to agree?
I wouldn't use the word predisposed, I would say more sensitive to. So, and it's worth looking at that in a little bit more detail. So we know how much of a person's sensitivity to depression and anxiety is due to your genes. There's quite a broad scientific consensus on this. It's between 30 and 40%. The way we know it is actually, you'd think there'd be a more sophisticated way of doing this, but there isn't. You compare identical twins and non-identical twins, because obviously identical twins are more genetically similar than non-identical twins. When you compare those rates, you can figure out how much of something is genetic. That's how we know that 90% of your height is genetically determined. Not 100%. So under slavery, for example, African Americans were on average shorter than white Americans. Now they're on average taller because of all the horrific and barbaric poor nutrition and all the horrific and barbaric things that were done to them. So genes are not destined even with something like height. With depression and anxiety, 30 to 40%, it's about 35% of your susceptibility, your sensitivity is due to that. But there's a very important kind of caveat to that. Professor Avshalom Caspi did the most detailed research on the genetics of depression. He looked at this big New Zealand population study. It's a really fascinating study. And it found a particular gene that does increase your vulnerability to depression and anxiety. It's called the H5TT gene. But he also found something really interesting. If you carry that gene, you're more vulnerable to depression and anxiety, but only if you experience a trauma or if you become acutely lonely. If you carry that gene, but you don't experience an extreme trauma and you don't become acutely lonely, you're no more likely to become depressed and anxious than someone who doesn't carry that gene. And I think that tells something about the biological factors. So there are three kinds of cause of depression and anxiety that play out in everyone who becomes depressed to some degree. There's biological factors, which are real. There's psychological factors, how you think about yourself and life. And then there's social factors, which are the environment, how we live together. And they all play a role, but the biological factors seem to increase your vulnerability to the social and psychological factors. They don't determine them. So anyone who's been told, and this is told to a lot of people, that you were born with depression, you inherited your depression. And I thought that for a while. My mother had been very depressed before I was born and when I was born. That is not true. It can make you more vulnerable, but it doesn't write your destiny.
Let's pause there. We're speaking with Johann Hari, who's author of the new book, Lost Connections, Uncovering the Real Causes of Depression and the Unexpected Solutions. And that's exactly where we will pick up our conversation with him in part 2 of the interview.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A man who advertises his product on Fox News says specifically that his company advertises on Fox News because the viewers are gullible and stupid. You've probably seen those funny infomercial-like television ads. Sometimes they're 30 seconds long, sometimes they're a minute long. A lot of them air on daytime television or really late at night, usually not so much in prime time. It's often like a kitchen device or some super specialized piece of clothing that solves some minor problem that's portrayed as like a life-changing cataclysm in the ad. A lot of times they film the before you had the product part in black and white with sad music and people are frowning. And then the after you bought the product part is usually in color and the actors are really happy and upbeat all of a sudden.
You ever see a compilation video of all those before you had this product thing?
It's the best. And there's a company that advertises on Fox News called Scott eVest. It's a vest that has a lot of internal pockets to apparently solve the problem of being unable to carry around all your things when you're just walking around in the world. Here's their 30-second ad just to give you an idea of what we're talking about.
My name is Scott Jordan. My problem? I had tons of stuff to carry, but no easy way to do it. So I started Scotty Vest. At Scotty Vest, we make great-looking clothing with tons of hidden pockets and unique features. Now, you can carry all your stuff hands-free while looking great. Never worry about misplacing anything ever again. The uses are endless. Scotty Vest will change your life. Try it out. Visit scottevest.com right now and browse dozens of styles for both men and women.
Right. So it turns out that Breitbart, of all places, Breitbart will not tolerate criticism of Fox News, apparently. And they spotted that CEO or founder, former CEO and founder Scott Jordan posted on his personal Facebook post, "I love meeting new people that recognize me and my company from our television commercials. I'm on the ski lift and the following exchange just happened and happens often. I ask what network they saw me on. Invariably, people say Fox News. I laugh to myself and tell them that we primarily advertise on Fox because we find their viewership to be extremely gullible and much easier to sell than other networks. The look on their face at that time is priceless. I am not kidding you. I get to tell them they are effing idiots while getting rich off of them." Now, in response to Jordan's post, Scott Evest Corporation put out a statement calling the remarks offensive and inexcusable, and he ended up issuing an apology where he said, quote, or rather the statement from Scott Evest said, "The recent offensive and inexcusable social media post by Scott Jordan does not reflect the views of Scott Evest. He stepped down last year from management and he's not even involved." And then he has since deleted his Facebook and Twitter accounts and published an apology on Medium. This is so funny for multiple reasons. Number one, it's funny because it's obviously true. There's no doubt that the reason Alex Jones sells garbage supplements that will make you vital or whatever, the reason he sells it is because he has an audience that's disproportionately likely to buy that crap. The reason Glenn Beck was associated with the gold line scam, where they would say it's good to have gold financially, but instead of just selling you gold, they would sell you collectible coins that have just an astronomically inflated value. The reason even that Gwyneth Paltrow's pseudoscience nonsense on her Goop website, that probably appeals to the sort of anti-vaccine type crowd. These are markets that you can market to more easily, and Fox News is along those lines. So it's completely true what he says, but then it's obvious that someone from the company called them and they were like, "Listen, you still make money off of this. What you're doing is really not good for us. You've got to put out an apology," and he puts one out. But obviously he still thinks this, right? Like, who reads the fact that he apologized and says, "Oh, Scott Jordan doesn't think that the Fox News viewers are gullible and stupid anymore"? He knows that they are because they've got sales data and they know they do way better on Fox News for this nonsense product.
Yeah, really dumb move on his part, though, especially because these are your business partners.
Sure.
I mean, you pay them to advertise your product.
Right.
And even though you're not directly involved in the company, you're still getting those kickbacks.
Yeah.
And you're also insulting the people who buy your product. Doesn't really make much sense.
You're insulting everybody. And maybe he thought if it went on his personal Facebook site, it would never become widely known. But it's funny because it's true. And it also, by the way, relates to why I turn down offers to advertise products. Like a recent one was these chocolate energy and mental clarity bites that had, you know, ginkgo and who knows what else that improve your brain function and all this stuff. And I immediately say, I don't believe the claims, and neither will our audience. Now, if I was immoral, I would say, I think the product is BS, but I think you're going to trick our audience. I know the reason we have brilliant.org as an advertiser and not brain function chocolate energy bites is because I also have some sense, and we've surveyed our audience and understand something about who they are as well.
Yeah, but David, the Scotty Vest makes it so that you can carry all your stuff on you.
Yep.
As you go around from place to place. You don't have to wear a backpack. And, I mean, you have to wear the same article of clothing every day, but you'll get used to it.
I'll have to walk around looking like Steve Irwin for the rest of my life in order to carry 2 firearms and 3 laptops inside of my vest in case I ever need that. What a crazy product, right? Truly, truly. I mean, I guess if I was camping, I could imagine maybe buying it, or like for hiking or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think this is.
You don't think you would buy it no matter what? Italy and Australia, as well as some other European countries, are cracking down on the anti-vaxxer movement, and specifically the non-vaccination of kids, and they are starting to issue fines to parents who are choosing not to vaccinate. There's this growing movement that considers the non-vaccination of children tantamount to child abuse. And there's a number of countries in Europe, plus parts of Australia, which are starting to explore financial punishments for parents who don't vaccinate. Let's take a look at the list and see what's happening around the world in a few countries. In Italy, there are now 10 vaccines that are mandatory for kids up to age 16, and you can be fined up to $600 at the recent euro-US dollar exchange rate for noncompliance. In Germany, schools now have to report parents who are refusing doctors' counseling when it comes to vaccinations, and there are optional fines up to $3,000. In France, 11 vaccines are now mandatory by 2018. No fines in place yet. In Romania, you need proof of vaccination if you want to attend school. And then in New South Wales, Australia, unvaccinated kids are straight up banned from preschool and daycare. And there is a fine to the school for admitting unvaccinated children. Those evil European communist, oh, wait a second, Germany and Australia, I guess that doesn't really apply. The anti-vaccine right is calling this authoritarian government run amok. The anti-vaccine left calls this government supporting big pharma by mandating that people get vaccines produced by for-profit companies. But we know that this type of thing works. California has made it much more difficult to opt out of vaccines, and they've had really good results. Back since 2015, almost all school children in California must be vaccinated, with the exception of those with medical reasons. No more personal exemptions in California, no more religious exemptions in California. And for the 2015-16 school year, a couple years ago now, 93% of kids had received all of the required vaccinations, up from 90% the previous year. And presumably, we've seen continued increases there. Mississippi and West Virginia, interestingly, are two other states with really strict vaccine laws, and they are seeing huge vaccination numbers. More than 99% of kindergartners in Mississippi have had their MMR vaccine and their DTP vaccine. That's the highest rate in the US, and 98% in West Virginia. This is good. My one fear is the way that things have been going under Trump is that when there's world consensus growing around something, Trump will try to either ban it or opt out. Like we've seen that happen with the Paris Climate Accords, for example. Hopefully that won't happen here, because Trump does have some weird sort of non-science anti-vaccine comment in his past.
Or he'll make it so that, you know, it's okay to spread the vaccination schedule out.
Oh,
so
yeah,
you
yeah.
can attend preschool if you have some vaccines but not others, that sort of thing. That middle ground between two positions that are nothing to do with each other.
It was Trump, Rand Paul, and was it also Ben Carson?
Well, Ben Carson, you know, had a more sensible approach to it because the guy is a doctor after all.
Yeah.
But he was okay with the idea of spreading the vaccines out.
Yeah. Rand Paul's also a doctor.
That's true.
Though. Don't
an eye doctor.
That. Yeah. So anyway, good news. Good news. What's happening in Europe is good. New South Wales, Australia, even some U.S. states taking some decisive action on this. Hopefully Trump doesn't get reminded of the fact that, oh, yeah, I was placating the anti-vaxxers as well. Hopefully he's just forgotten about that.
Yeah. Is there an argument to be made, though, that this is going to disadvantage some of the kids who, because of their parents, won't vaccinate them? They can't attend preschool and kindergarten on schedule with the other kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will. And that, so you have to think about that, because if the punishment is a financial fine for the parents, that will further hurt the kids in terms of them not being able to go to school. So I think that you do need to deal with that. You do need to deal with that, but you've got to be strict when it comes to vaccines. We've got a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to this voicemail.
I know you're super high tech, you know, David, but what you got to realize is the internet is nothing else but it's a vision of ways for people to get information about you, to sell it to somebody else, to make money off it. It has no value for the American people. And people that live their lives on the internet, like I'm sure you do, are crazy. What do you think that you can write that they're not going to copy?
Okay.
And why would you want to give that out to people?
Yeah. I think the what a deliberate delivery. I think the argument is we shouldn't be concerned about net neutrality, because the internet is only good for people to find information out about you. And if you live your life on the internet, then you're crazy. it's not exactly an argument against net neutrality that I've heard before, that it's just that the internet's bad. That's not, I'm not even sure I know how to respond to it.
I mean, in terms of people on the internet being crazy, I think we have someone here who could be throwing stones from a glass house.
Yeah, right. Yeah. By the way, there's crazy people on the internet and off the internet. I don't know that net neutrality really plays in or factors in to the sort of mental status or health or balance of the individuals on the internet.
There's crazy people on both sides.
Sure. Yes, we could say that. We could indeed say that. On the bonus show today, great bonus show, Israel and Poland are agreeing to talks over a controversial Holocaust blame bill. Parents are making their children drink bleach to cure them of autism. I wonder if it's the autism that they believe a vaccine caused to begin with. And a fitness tracking app has given away the location of some secret U.S. Army bases around the world. It's weird. It's a weird story. Get access to the bonus show one of two ways. Become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Become a patron at least the $5 a month level at patreon.com/davidpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.